The Global News podcast from the BBC World Service, with reports and analysis from across the world. The latest news 7 days a week. BBC World Service podcasts are supported by advertising.
This is the Global News podcast from the BBC World Service. I'm Jackie Leonard, and at 13 hours GMT on Monday, the 13th of September, these are our main stories. An emergency international conference is getting underway in Geneva to discuss the humanitarian crisis in Afghanistan. The Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett is having talks in Egypt with President Sisi on the first such visit by an Israeli head of government in 10 years. And Nigerian gunmen have raided a prison south of the capital, Abuja, releasing 240 inmates. Also in this podcast, a trial of a blood test to detect early pre-symptomatic cancer is starting in the UK.
It's a blood test that will detect whether a cancer exists before the obvious sign and symptom, and that's so important, particularly in some cancers which are really hard to detect and diagnose early.
It's been almost a month since the Taliban took control of Afghanistan. In a country that is dependent on humanitarian help, aid workers there are appealing for safe and unimpeded access throughout the country. The UN High Commissioner for Human Rights is Michelle Bachelet.
I'm also profoundly alarmed by the escalating humanitarian crisis. I call on all states to assist the United Nations and other actors with the provision of humanitarian assistance to the country, while remaining mindful that the provision of such assistance might be rooted in the respect and protection of human rights.
There are warnings that food aid and other vital services in Afghanistan are close to running out. International donors are meeting in Geneva to discuss humanitarian relief, as our South Asia correspondent Rajini Vaidyanathan explained.
There really is an urgent call coming from the United Nations. There's a meeting in Geneva today calling for something like $600 million to be raised, to be given to these agencies to enable them to continue their work in Afghanistan. Now, of course, when the Taliban took over in August, many international agencies stopped giving their UN funding, or their funding, to Afghanistan. That came to an end. Concerns over how the Taliban would use that money. That actually cut off a huge financial source for these very important programs. I mean, just to put it into context, around half of the population is already dependent on aid. So that's around 18 million people. The UN says that a third of the country doesn't know where their next meal will come from.
Obviously, it's been an incredibly volatile and turbulent time recently. How are the aid NGOs actually able to work on the ground?
That's a really good question. I think the first thing to point out is many have left. The United Nations has always said that they will stay and deliver, and that they are committed to ensuring that they continue their operations in Afghanistan. But it's interesting because the UN's Emergency Relief Coordinator, Martin Griffiths, was in Afghanistan last week, and he met with the Taliban, and he raised concerns over the safety of humanitarian workers, and he stressed to the Taliban that the UN needs the freedom to employ who they want to do the jobs on the ground, i.e. men and women, and also wanted assurances from the Taliban that they would not interfere in their work on the ground. And actually, he has asked the Taliban for written assurances on this. It's unclear whether those written assurances have come, but certainly speaking to people in Afghanistan, they say that so far they have been able to continue with their work when it comes to humanitarian programs. But, you know, the longer term concern is if we start to see some of the policies that the Taliban has announced when it comes to women, and denying, for example, only yesterday, women at universities cannot study alongside men. The classes will be segregated, for example. There are now some concerns that these aid agencies may not be able to deliver aid to women and to young girls, and so that is why the United Nations is asking for those assurances.
That was Rajini Vaidyanathan. And still in Afghanistan, the BBC's confirmed that more than 20 civilians have been killed since the Taliban took the Panjshir Valley earlier this month. A Taliban spokesperson has denied such killings are taking place. Yelda Hakim reports.
The streets of a famous bazaar in Panjshir Valley are empty. One Taliban fighter stands on the side of the road. There is hardly any traffic. This market used to be bustling, but it's now a ghost town. And it's no surprise when you can be shot dead on the side of the street. The BBC has verified shocking shocking footage which you may find distressing. There's a group of Taliban fighters and local men. A man in military clothes is dragged away. It's unclear whether he was in the army. This is common dress in the valley. Voices are raised. Seconds later, he's shot several times and killed. A bystander insists the man they've just killed was not in the military. The BBC has confirmed that more than 20 people have been killed since the Taliban entered Panjshir province. One of them was shopkeeper and father of two, Abdul Sameh. His family want his name and story to be known. A Taliban spokesperson denies civilians are being targeted.
That was Yalla Hakim. It's been announced that the Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett is having talks today in Egypt with President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. It'll be the first such official trip to Egypt by an Israeli head of government for a decade. Our Middle East analyst Alan Johnston has more details.
This meeting between the Israeli and Egyptian leaders was expected, but exactly when it would happen was kept quiet for security reasons, and today's talks were only announced hours before they were due to start. When they get going in the Egyptian resort town of Sharm el-Sheikh, tensions surrounding the Gaza Strip are likely to dominate the discussions. Egypt has always played a major role in efforts to mediate between Israel and the Palestinian militants in the Strip.
Alan Johnston. In South Africa, 6 people have appeared in a Johannesburg court accused of killing a whistleblower who helped expose a multi-million-dollar corruption scandal. Babita Deokaran was shot several times outside her home after taking her child to school last month. She worked in the Gauteng Health Department's finance office and had recently become a key witness in an investigation into fraudulent contracts. These were worth more than $20 million to buy personal protective equipment during the coronavirus pandemic. A bail hearing for those accused of the murder has been postponed until next month. Her death has raised questions about the lack of protection for whistleblowers in South Africa. Our Southern Africa correspondent, Umza Pilani, looks at the cost of speaking out.
I don't feel safe. Every single time I feel that somebody's following me. So that peace of mind is nothing.
That is the voice of Musilo Mutebo. It is because of whistleblowers like her that many of South Africa's corruption scandals have been exposed. Corruption is rife in the Southern African country. According to anti-graft body Corruption Watch, of the 33,000 reports it has received in the last 8 years, at least 16% of those involved local government, which is often at the core of serving the needs of the poor. Citizens held protests over the years, at one point directing them at former President Jacob Zuma. Here they are singing "Zuma must go." He's accused of presiding over a decade of corruption through his friends, the Gupta family. They've all denied any wrongdoing. There's a new president now in Cyril Ramaphosa, but the looting has not stopped. Experts tell me this shows how deeply rooted the problem is and how wide the network runs. But what is life like for whistleblowers in South Africa? What happens to those who dare to speak out?
Whistleblowers have not had a great time in our country. They have been subjected to enormous pressures. And I regret that in many instances we have not treated them well.
That was President Ramaphosa during his evidence at the State Capture Commission earlier this year. It's an investigation that's looking into alleged corruption by some in his government, accused of working closely with the private sector. And for whistleblowers like Musilo, the experience described by President Ramaphosa is one she knows too well.
Their modus operandi was just bankrupt her and smear her name.
She was an executive director at Gupta-linked advisory firm Trillion at the time. The company was used to siphon millions of dollars from state companies, often through phony invoices.
You know, I naively thought that the report will come out, the state of capture report, and people will be convicted and go to jail. And within a couple of months, I would find work and life will just continue as normal. No. I was unemployed for 2 years. So that's the price
At least 858 corruption-related murders occurred between 2015 and 2020, according to officials. There is some kind of witness protection program, but after years of seeing state-orchestrated corruption, experts tell me very few people are willing to entrust their lives to this system.
Pumza Filani in South Africa. Kidnapping for ransom has become one of the most significant security challenges in Nigeria. There have already been several mass kidnappings this year, but today dozens of children who were seized at school in northwest Nigeria 2 weeks ago have been freed. So, was a ransom paid? A question for our Africa regional editor, Will Ross.
The authorities in Zamfara state in northwest Nigeria